Hello, everyone. I'm Rick Sterling from Western IM, and welcome to today's IMCanadaConnect RIM Month presentation. We have a large crowd today registered for the session, which speaks volumes to Andrew's topic of the ethics of data privacy. I just wanted to thank the Canadian ARMA chapter liaison group, which has members from all Canadian chapters, for their ongoing support in the IMCanadaConnect initiative. Without their assistance, we would not be able to supply an annual set of Canadian content to our RIM community across the country. As well, my thanks to my partners, Troy, Brian, and Daryl, who work behind the scenes all year to support this initiative. I'm happy to introduce Andrew Geider today. I consider Andrew a friend, not only to me, but ARMA across the country. He's extensive records management experience in both public and private sectors and shares his knowledge with his peers in the RIM community. Andrew is currently serving on the ARMA Vancouver board and is a mentor for the ARMA Canada Young Professional Mentorship Group. Andrew holds a Master's of Archival Studies from UBC and a Certificate in Records Management, CRM, is a candidate for the International Association of Privacy Professionals, IAPP, Canadian Privacy Certificate, and has taught 3 levels of records management at Vancouver Community College and the University of Fraser Valley. Having developed change management strategies for the planning and implementation of electronic records management systems, and as the Freedom of Information Officer, he can demonstrate that records management and freedom of information can complement each other. Please hold your questions today until the end of the Andrew session and put them into the chat, on the Zoom chat at the bottom of your screens, and we will get Andrew to speak to them right after his presentation. I'm personally looking forward to today's presentation, and Andrew, take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Again, like I said, I'm going to be talking about the ethics of data privacy. And so what are we going to talk about? The use and abuse of personal data. We have personal data. If it's used properly, it's fine, but it's when it's abused that we start running into problems. What are the pitfalls, the problems of what happens if data is misused? I'm going to discuss that and some controversial data usage. While it's legal, really, is it ethical? What is digital ethics and privacy? What does this all mean? How does it relate to us? And then at the end, I'll wrap up and then we can have some questions. So what are the great advantages of the computer and automation is that it provides such easy access to data through powerful search facilities, ease of communication, and sophisticated analysis capabilities. When the data is sensitive and personal, however, this can lead to serious abuse because it opens the way for the data to be used for purposes quite different from its intended use. And this can happen for a number of reasons. The rules governing who can use the data and for what purpose may not be clear or restrictive enough to protect the intentions and interests of the subjects. Or those who control the data may not enforce the rules. And finally, they may not have sufficient control over who has access or who accesses the data, right? Because really, we're talking about relationships between people, between customers, between employees. How do we go about managing that in a responsible and professional way? Marketers use collective data along with statistical analysis techniques and psychological models to predict people's purchasing preferences and behavior, and to identify those factors that most strongly influence consumers' loyalty and choices. Not only do they want contact information such as names and addresses, phone numbers, email addresses, and internet IDs, but also more personal information such as shopping habits, amount of assets, type of car owned, family situation, age, gender, and so on to target and adapt their advertising. I'm going to be talking about that a little more later. Supermarkets, department stores, and other retailers can now track the items, can now track the items as we are moving forward. Sorry, my mouse has gone a little wonky. Just bear with me for 1 second. Okay, I can track the information. So as we're moving forward, this information can be used to personalize ads according to characteristics, circumstances, and preferences of each individual, especially when the ads are delivered directly and online. Now, with the development of mobile apps that track a user's location in real time, the ads can even be adapted to the recipient's current location. Targeted advertising is by far the greatest source of revenue for their businesses and what makes it possible for them to provide their services to their users free of charge. The idea, therefore, is that in taking advantage of the free services, the users in return agree to give the company access to their own personal information, which it then uses to generate revenue that covers the cost of providing those services. It seems that everybody benefits. However, the arrangement is legitimate as long as the users have knowingly consented to the collection and use of their personal data, and that use is limited to what was originally agreed to. However, in many cases, it is questionable whether these conditions have been properly met. Many users of these services do not realize that service providers are constantly monitoring users' online behavior and the information they store and communicate through the site, storing, compiling, and analyzing the results, using it for the service's own purposes and sharing it with others. The companies point out that this information is contained in their terms of service and privacy policies, and claim that anyone who uses the service implicitly agrees to those terms. However, the policies are generally very long and complex. In many cases, the user is not required to read them, let alone take some positive action to acknowledge that he or she accepts the terms. Either users agree to surrender all control over their personal information, or they cannot use the site. Moreover, companies frequently change their privacy policies and practices without giving users adequate notice. Since similar sites all have essentially the same policy, any user who wants to use a search engine, virtually a necessity today, has to accept that searches will be monitored, stored, aggregated, cross-referenced, and analyzed and used for unspecified purposes. Now let's talk about young people, Facebook and all. Adolescents are often naive about the rules under which they are operating and about how their personal information could be used. Their age and lack of experience leaves them vulnerable to exploitation. However, they are at an age when they are discovering and defining their identities. They need room to experiment, to explore, and inevitably make mistakes. It is essential that they have a safe, protected space in which to do this. This is why privacy is especially important for adolescents or young people. Their participation in social networks and other online activities could not be taken as permission to collect, use, and broadcast their personal information. This becomes even more a concern with reports that Facebook is considering allowing children under 13 to join. Now, this can be a serious attack on the autonomy and dignity of the individual subject, of the person. If someone reveals personal information as part of an application for a credit card, for example, it is because the person decides it is worth the benefit, and because the person is establishing a relationship of mutual trust with the credit provider and its agents. And it should be the same with online retailers, email providers, search services, or the social network. If the holders of the information provide it to an employer or sell it to a marketer without authorization, they are violating the intent of the subject and committing a breach of trust. Because a lot of what we do comes down to trust. Now, what are some of the potential pitfalls? Again, thinking that data ethics doesn't apply to your organization. Privacy and ethical considerations are not often top of mind for some executives. Business leaders are not intentionally pushing these thoughts away. It's often just easier for them to focus on things they can see, on what they can touch, the tools, the technologies, and strategic objectives associated with data management. Then, on seemingly invisible ways, data management can go wrong, right? The McKinsey Global Survey, a little more than a quarter of respondents said they have data professionals that check for information. Less than 10% less of the 27% had a dedicated data governance committee, and less than a third looked for equity and fairness as relevant AI risks, right? So what does that leave the rest of the companies? Is it just don't ask, don't tell, or hope no one finds out, or hope that nothing bad happens and that everything then will go away? Thinking in silos, it's not just the province of data scientists or legal and compliance teams. When you get right down to it, it is everybody. Data ethics is everybody's domain because all employees have to think through the ethical issues. It's not just one person, but as a group, as a cohesive unit, we have to work together to decide what is right and wrong and go beyond just what is legal, right? Because laws can show us what we can do and what we can't do. But what's more important is whether we should pursue it. And if we do, how do we go about doing it so that it's ethically? I hesitate to use the word morally, but that we retain our moral compass of what is right and wrong. Again, chasing short-term ROI can be very problematic because a lot of what we do comes down to money, right? Some of us work in corporations and private business. We have stocks on the stock market. And so what we have to do is please our shareholders. But is that really the right thing to do for the short term? As one tech company explained, it's very tempting to collect as much data as possible and hold on to it and use it and find some use for it after you have collected it. So he goes on to say, if my chief marketing officer cannot target users to create an efficient customer acquisition channel, he will likely get fired at some point, or at least he won't make his bonus. Right? Something to remember is that money talks, but what we have to be careful is who we talk to, right? We really don't want to compromise ourselves. And then what is the provenance of the data? Did the person make an informed consent? When the collector of this data started collecting, did they actually get informed consent from the person who gave it, right? One of the worst things we can do is have implied consent, I would argue, because that can lead to a misunderstanding, right? Does anything contain non-public or private information? So again, we have to look at where this data came from and not just accept it at face value or just take it and then not ask any questions. So again, algorithms and AI are very important, right? And so again, what is the impact that we use? How often do people check for bias, for implicit bias? Because really, nobody wants to admit that they are prejudiced or that they have any bad traits. So what steps can we do to eliminate this? So again, as one technologist said, let's ask some hard questions. Start your meetings about AI by asking, are the algorithms we are building sexist or racist? Or is it just so ingrained in ourselves that we miss it? And we even present it to our peers who are similar to us and who miss it as well. And then again, it's important to consider not just the types of data being used, but more importantly, what are they being used for? Okay, and what can they potentially be used for? So we have the here and now right here, but also in the future, something we can't even conceive or imagine, right? And we don't want to get caught up in having this information that can be potentially used for a different purpose. Now, there are some very controversial science things. There is so much data out in the world that many people are overwhelmed by its sheer magnitude of it. You know, most people have no idea how powerful that information truly is. You know, and there are data experiments that have the potential to improve lives, but at the same time, how do the companies not step on toes with their data usage and application? You know, shopping habits are tracked and analyzed based on what we do, where we go shopping, paper or electronic. Do we buy brand name or generic? You know, for example, now, if you go to Save On and you purchase something using your Save On card, yes, you get the discount, but Save On knows, you know, who you are, what you purchased, how much you purchased, etc. Now, this data is stored in internal databases where it's being picked apart in an effort to find trends between the demographics and buying habits, right? Supposedly in an effort to serve you well. But this can lead to problems. And the first one I'm going to talk about is Target in the United States with their pregnancy prediction. So what happened was, you can see it right here, Minneapolis man learned of his daughter's pregnancy through Target's advertising campaign. She went on, she bought baby products, and then it gave a pregnancy prediction. The man found out about it, you know, the father, and she did not tell him, and this could be very problematic. So again, this caused a media firestorm because Target did not violate any privacy policies, but it did mean that the private life event was open. You know, was it the predictive analytics project was successful, right? Because the targeting worked, but the public thought that the targeted marketing was a little too invasive and direct. So let's take this one step further. If the lady would have miscarried, would Target have continued to send her baby products as she moved through the trimester? Was there any way for this person to opt out of Target's advertising? You know, these are questions that we have to ask ourselves. So Allstate telemetry packages. Telematics is a method of monitoring cars, trucks, and equipment and other assets by using GPS technology and onboard diagnostics, also known as OBD. Your braking, your speeding, where you go, how fast you go, etc., can potentially be used to determine your premiums. Now, if you're a good driver, this may be good news for you, but some concerns get raised when it comes to GPS tracking. How ethically sound is this practice of using your driving data? Because the real concern is how GPS tracking will affect people. Are we willing to give up our privacy to save money? Well, some people do, some people don't, but it's a decision that each of us have to make to ourselves. I'm not saying there's a right answer or wrong answer, but at least we have to think through what is being offered to us. And finally, the OkCupid data scrape. This huge data release raised eyebrows and forced questions about the ethics of releasing already public data, Because in 2016, over 70,000 profiles had their data released in the Open Science Network. And 2 Danish researchers did this. What does big data ethics have to say about already public data? And what is off limits? Because the main concern raised was that even though data may be public, that doesn't mean someone consents to personally identifiable data being published on an online form, right? So ethically, it's not okay in everyone's eyes. And just because it's on the internet, does that mean that I can take it? So I go to a dating website, I copy and paste someone's profile, I put it into Facebook, and then I send it to all my friends. Yes, the data is public, but is that what the user intended the information and the data to be used for? And just to say it's already public always doesn't wash, because again, looking at what is explicit or implicit, is it ethically right or wrong? We all have our own moral compass, and so everyone's ideas will differ. But it is in this differentiation then that people will start to get hurt. So let's start talking about digital ethics and privacy. Gartner, they're a research group, identified digital ethics as very strong trend and more than a trend. And I like this right here. We're shifting from, are we compliant, legal, towards are we doing the right thing, right? What is the ethical thing to do? Because as we're getting more information, COVID was a great example of this. The government got information, the health authorities got information. Now, what did they do with it? And how did they use it? And how potentially can they use it? They all claim, we want to contain the spread of COVID-19, but are we sacrificing our privacy? Are we sacrificing data protection? And are we really using this for the greater good, right? It really depends on who you talk to. Do people want their coronavirus information to be shared? Because just because this information seems to be used for good at the moment, doesn't mean it can't be obtained in the future by those with malicious intentions. So we have to start ask ourselves this very question. If something is good, lots of data is more better, right? And how is it, if it is, how is it being safeguarded? Because now that we have tracking, we have surveillance information, the government is out there, they have this. Is there any way to rein it back in once the pandemic ends, right? Will there be less surveillance? Will we have more privacy? How do we get back what we have lost? And I'm hoping we didn't lose too much, because as a society, not just individuals, are we prepared to accept this new level of surveillance and privacy intrusion forever? And that is something that each of us have to ask ourselves. I don't want to come out and say it's right or it's wrong, but thinking it through, because I found that's what a lot of organizations do not do when they gather personal and private information. They gather it, they keep it, they hold on to it, and then things start going sideways when they're used, when the information is used for an unintended purpose. If they would not have had this personal information, you wouldn't have had this data breach or unintended use of information, right? So again, we're looking at personal information. It's more and more readily becoming available. Well, what do we do? How do we manage it properly, right? A lot of it comes down to trust. How do we develop a culture of trust with the individual, with the organization, with businesses, with consumers, so that we do the right thing with the data, right? Instead of just compliance, right? The legal aspect, consider if we're doing the right thing with the private information that we collect. And I think in our hearts, we know, but more importantly is, do we care, right? Are we doing the right thing, or are we chasing the almighty dollar? That's something each of us will have to ask ourselves, because ultimately, there may not be a clear right or wrong answer. It is ethical, right? It is not cast in stone. We all have our own idea of what is morally right and morally wrong. And then we take that to our work, to the marketplace. So what I'd like to do now is open it up for questions. And I'd be very interested in feedback, constructive criticism, etc., of what I've talked about. And please feel free to disagree with me. I'll open it up now to Troy.
Yeah, great. I'll monitor chat in the QA here. Rick, do you have any kind of input before we?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions to Andrew, if you're okay with that, Andrew.
By all means.
I can't help but think it was a wonderful presentation, by the way. Thank you. It really made me think about a lot of things. As we haven't really talked in the last little while, but we've been very busy at Western IM, and not just us, all software vendors are busy right now in thinking about integration or doing integration on a test basis with ChatGPT, which is, of course, the artificial intelligence organization that Microsoft has now invested very heavily in, to the tune of $13 billion, and is going to incorporate into their Office applications in the future. And where I'm going with this is we have to really start thinking more and more about what this whole use of AI in virtually every application we're going to be using down the road is going to enhance this whole idea of collection of information without anybody even knowing it's happening along the way. And the other thing that comes to mind too, that maybe we could talk about a little bit is the whole idea of the privacy by design aspect of projects that people are going to do using the AI down the road to further their software tools.
Okay, I'm the first to admit I am not as proficient as I should be, in AI and the latest technologies. It would be nice if people had a method of opting out so that all their personal information is not collected. People call Google and Microsoft, the evil empire for a reason. Because they have us, we have to use them. We have to work with them. Now, if they're so big, can they dictate their privacy, quote unquote, terms on us? And can we say no and go somewhere else? That is my problem. Everything is so big, so immense, so ingrained in our work habits. You just try to work on a PC without Microsoft. It just really can't be done.
Right.
So I really don't know how we can tell Microsoft, what we want in terms of privacy. Because if they want to, they can just steamroll over us. Yes, we have laws. Again, they have lawyers, so without wanting to sound too cynical, it can be problematic. Is this a fight we can win? That's something I really don't know. And I don't want to sound like a pessimist if I say no.
Yeah, no, for sure, Andrew. I think my sense is that we've got a couple of comments on this too, which I'm really looking forward to hearing what we all think about it. Troy, do you want to read some of the comments out?
Yeah, I think we kind of touched on the first one already about the whole legal parts of things, that with the comment here, isn't it illegal to disclose personal information without consent from the individual? At some point, you indicated that it's not ethical. I understand that it's up to the courts to decide, but privacy protection legislation in Canada prohibits the disclosure without consent, with very few exceptions. So
yeah, and I agree with that. And a lot of it depends also on the country that you're in. What kind of consent do you provide? Do you actually read and understand the entire consent form or explanation that is given to you? If it's 4 pages or 6 pages written by lawyers, a lot of people will just scroll to the bottom and hit, yes, I accept, just so they can use that software product. Again, I could take someone to court and say that, this is my personal information, but depends upon how it was used, how, the company informed me. Home Depot got into trouble with emailing receipts and then retaining people's personal email for other purposes. Yes, we have a court system, but again, these large organizations have also very good lawyers. And I've worked with lawyers in the past, and sometimes it comes down to who has the better lawyer will win.
Lissy here says, I'm hoping to do a survey to gather information from various departments to understand what personal information we're collecting, how it's secured, purpose, etc. Is this something you've done in the past? And if so, have you any ideas for it or templates?
Well, I haven't really collected people's personal information. I have worked with our Troy Bank at the City of Burnaby on writing PIAs and reviewing PIAs when we have software upgrades, when we have programs, when we do surveys, when we are gathering, the personal information. But I don't hold on to that personal information. So, I really have not been in a position where I've gathered people's personal information and stored them onto, the P drive or my desktop or a folder or something like that.
So how about to the PIA side? What was some of the kind of activities or, templates, as kind of asked here, do you do when during PIA?
Well, when we do our PIAs, again, it depends on the programs, on the software. We have our standard PIA templates, and we work with the person who came to us to ensure that the PIA is compliant, that it matches the standards of the OIPC. And we also tell, people, hey, you can start this program without our sign off, but if anything goes sideways, you're going to wear it.
Mhm.
And Nicholas has got a question here. Is there a need to make our privacy legislation stricter, such as having stiffer fines as exist in the EU, the GDPR stuff?
Yeah, I would like to think that having stricter laws, will sort of alleviate some of the issues that we have. Higher fines, potential jail sentences, for privacy breaches, for invasion of privacy. Again, this is what I'd like to think, but a lot of it starts with education. And if people refuse to be educated or ignore it, then you have to take the stick approach as opposed to the carrot approach.
Yeah. Ryan makes a comment here about privacy was lost decades ago, but has become more public visible in recent years. Social media has tremendous financial power. Do you see creating a public awareness on how a company is perceived by owners, employees, customers?
Well, I've seen like on LinkedIn, there are organizations like the Privacy Commissioner in Ontario and that are trying to raise awareness of privacy with people. But I don't think that people really appreciate privacy because they don't think that it impacts them, but it does. But they don't appreciate how it impacts them. So first of all, you have to make the users, the people who sign in, who use Facebook, etc., aware that this is here. You really cannot remove it. Once it's on the internet, it's there forever, and constantly reinforcing to them that something bad can happen to you if you do something stupid. Yep. Again, all party photos, other inappropriate photos and things like that can come back to haunt you when you're going for a job interview.
Right. Actually, just to kind of talk to that, the privacy and convenience, where we kind of make those compromises. I was having a discussion about this quite a while ago when the cloud, kind of the transition to the cloud became such a thing. And I remember a comment I made to somebody. It's like, we didn't stop using a CB. If you know what a CB, like truckers use in their trucks. Mm-hmm. We didn't stop using a CB because the truck station I was driving up to could advertise to me, right? Mm-hmm. The CB was such a powerful tool for communication that we just knew that as we drove past a truck station, we might get ads from the truck station. Same with the kind of the transition to social media and the cloud stuff is that we're using the convenience of those systems for the benefits that we're getting from them, but at the same time might be losing some of that kind of privacy.
That's true. And if you look at sometimes if you go onto a website, they'll talk about cookies. Do you accept, these cookies? What kind of settings do you want and things like that? Some will automatically click accept all. Some will say reject all. I have found, I've done some tests, when you reject all, you go onto the site, you don't have the full robustness that you would when I exited and then went back in again on a different computer and then clicked accept all when it came to the cookies. So, again, it's a question that we have to ask ourselves is how much privacy are we willing to give up for convenience?
Yeah.
And everybody will have a different answer.
Has there been, Andrew, I seems that I've read a lot of things over the last couple of years about age demographic and how different age groups think about that whole idea of privacy, or how concerned they are, I guess, about their personal privacy as opposed to other age groups that may be more concerned about that kind of thing.
Yeah, I have found, can I say, people who did not grow up with automation with PCs tend to be less concerned about privacy. Can I say people over 70? My dad's 90. He's never had a laptop or a PC. He's always had his landline, never had a cell phone, never had a tablet, old school, for lack of a better term. He's not that concerned about privacy. His only concern for him, a privacy violation would be if someone took mail out of his mailbox, and then read that. But because he doesn't have email, he doesn't go on social media, he's not concerned about being hacked or anything like that. Now, a critic could say, well, you're a Luddite, therefore nothing bad can happen to you. And we can accept the new technology, but we have to put safeguards on those technologies moving forward. An example, let's say, is self-driving cars. Various Tesla and others are working on that. But now when we start programming the AI and the software for that, we have to start asking, okay, if there's a potential accident up ahead and the computer has to make a decision, who gets hurt, the driver or the passenger? If the car is coming up to a pedestrian, what does one do knowing who's going to get hurt and things like that? So all of those are built into the software using our own biases in that. So we have to start thinking in terms of a bigger picture on how we are going to manage, again, the privacy of the individuals, the privacy of the drivers in that, and how we're going to use that software so it is safe for everybody.
Hey, Troy, and that's some of the things that concern me personally about integration with AI tools, because sometimes even the software vendors that are doing the integration with those tools may not understand how the AI actually works or what it's doing and what the function looks like behind the scenes, or be less concerned with all of that kind of topic. They just want the results out of their application and people to buy their software. So it's an interesting kind of extension to what we've been worried about in the past.
That actually kind of ties into Nicholas's comment here. Some members of the public are becoming increasingly aware of the role of privacy legislation and their rights. However, within the private sector, businesses, and perhaps to some extent public sector, we continue to operate in an environment where we still try to operate as we did in the past, where we do not, as an organization, pay as much attention to privacy rights and legislation ethics. Andrew, what are your thoughts on changing this?
Again, it comes down to educating the user or the person. And there was sounding technical, I call it change management. Changing the way we think about privacy, changing the way that we do things. Because it's very easy to go onto, let's say, Amazon and start ordering products. But then once we start getting advertising or pop-up ads on the next time we go onto Amazon, suggesting we buy these products because we bought this in the past, that should raise some red flags. But quite often people don't think it through. They almost seem to appreciate suggestions on other purchases. And what we have to do first is educate ourselves. And the information is out there. The tools are out there to do it. But it's incumbent upon us to take the responsibility to start with ourselves and not blame somebody else.
Very true.
Brian makes a comment here about, I suggest the data will always be out there considering the cyber groups. That the resolution is managing the use. Our law and business values are sadly way behind the technology as it advances. Is there a way to influence this in the RM groups?
It's always going to be a challenge to get legislation up to speed. I found that legislation, especially on the federal level, moves at a glacial pace because it is often dictated by politics. So how do we speed that up? How do we educate the makers of laws to ensure that this is important? And what we have to do is not so much expedite it, but move it faster, because technology will always be ahead of the law or legal. And our challenge is to close that gap. Now, to be blunt, I don't know how to do it. We just can't tell politicians I don't know what to do because they'll laugh at us. But, how do we go about with laws? There's so much we can do on the provincial level, but there's also so much we can do on the federal level. So I'd like to think provincially that we can be ahead of Ottawa and that we can protect the consumers in British Columbia faster and better than on a federal level.
And if we go back historically to when PIPEDA first came out in Canada, right now it's walking with a walker. It's that old.
Mm-hmm.
It's ancient. And BC, Alberta, and Quebec modified the PIPEDA legislation, but not massively. They didn't do a whole lot of wild and crazy things. They basically took it and modified it. So it's not, we're really still working with that old legislation across the country.
And also the challenge is when it comes to privacy, how do we ensure the rights of the citizens without penalizing them? So for example, if we institute a fee for an FOI request, right, then we are giving the applicant the information within reason, right, sections 12 through that they're requesting, but now that's costing them money. So in a sense, the more freedom we want in getting information, the more it's going to cost, and it can be potentially viewed as a moneymaker, right, rather than something that's ethically responsible. And we have to grapple with that as well.
So another question sometimes comes to mind is, even in our own organizations, and you kind of touched on this earlier, Andrew, was do we actually talk to our own employees about what's right or wrong in terms of collection of information? Because a very large organization, a business unit could be out there collecting data and information without even knowing the rights or wrongs of that whole situation. With unless somebody tells them about it when they start, it could be something that they don't have any idea about.
That's true. And that's why I work for the city of Burnaby, and what we do is we have training. We have online and in-person training with regards to FOI, with regards to privacy, with regards to records management. So, we tell employees and volunteers what their responsibilities are, so that there is not ignorance or misunderstanding or anything like that. Organizations, businesses, have to start educating and teaching their employees and their vendors, and vendors are more of a problem because they're not employees, of acceptable use of data. And sometimes you have to drop a contract for that.
Yeah, there is a lot of third-party situations with many organizations where they have third-party people that have access to all their information and data. So very true that is also an issue. That often isn't contractually stated either. Like procurement can easily sign a contract with an external vendor and not even let them know what the responsibilities are with the touching the data.
Yeah, I'm sure it does happen. But again, a lot of it comes down to, again, educating procurement and finance and those who write the contract saying, look, these are the needs, the obligations of our organization. And we'd like you to put that in writing when we deal with third parties so that it doesn't just affect one department or one section of the organization.
Well, there's certainly a lot of aspects to this whole idea of data privacy that we don't always think about too. It's not just the typical kind of data privacy information either. There's a whole lot of facets to this that have to come into play.
It's not always the extremes where you're getting fines for jaywalking from cameras.
Yeah,
right out of your bank account to it is quite a spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, even the idea of police across the country wearing body cams. I mean, if we'd have thought about that 10 years ago, nobody would have thought there was a snowball's chance that would ever happen. But it's kind of taking effect all over the country now. People are starting to be cognizant of the fact that we need data. So what happens with that information? How's it handled? There's a whole lot of aspects of privacy around that as well.
and the thing is, body cameras with police can easily become political because a politician can say, well, we want to be tough on crime. In order to be tough on crime, we have to give the police the tools that they need to be tough on crime. So we're going to give them body cameras. And the public will say, yes, 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 we're going to be tough on crime. We're going to put these people in jail, etc. But they really don't think through, first of all, what were the causes of the crime? But then again, the whole aspect of personal data, people caught in the background, how long will this information be retained?
Right.
Who
right.
will use it, etc.
Yeah, we were. I think back to a time when we were doing ARMA national conferences when I was region manager of ARMA in Canada here, and we stopped taking we used to take pictures of the conferences. During the conference, we would take pictures for, collages for the breaks and things like that. And at one point we just went, we can't do this anymore because there's no way we can get sign off from all the people that may be in the picture. So we just stopped all of that. And we're going back now a whole lot of years.
Well, and I can relate to that because 15 years ago, I started teaching at Vancouver Community College. And what I did was we'd take a group picture at the very end of the students, that class, and then I would email it just to the students. But what happened was then this one student emailed it to other non-students, right? And then that got out, and so I had to discontinue that. What I said was, okay, if you guys want to take pictures of yourselves or the group or whatever, you do it, but I'm not getting involved. I'm not giving consent or blessing or anything like that.
Right.
Again, all it takes is one person. I wouldn't say to ruin it, but to use something unintentionally, they'll give them the benefit of the doubt, and then it can start to snowball.
Mm-hmm.
There's tools out there now where you can actually view those past images, where the AI scraped it all and found past images, and they did it during a news article where they pulled up a news article of past news article of that person from when they were in college. Thankfully, it wasn't anything a bad one, but live on camera, they're live pulling up past feeds from
with
we're getting close to the top of the hour. Do we want to maybe look at wrapping up?
Sure, Troy. That'd be great.
Okay.
Well, I'd like to thank Andrew for a really great presentation today, and not just a great presentation, Andrew. I think it was really mentally stimulating for me, kind of thinking about a lot of these situations you talked about, and maybe didn't put them all together in my head until we had this presentation today. I'd also like to thank all the attendees for the support of IMCanadaConnect initiative, which what that's all about, for those of you that don't know, is each ARMA chapter in Canada contributes at least one presentation in order to get us a full annual program for Canadian RIM content. And I also want to thank the Western IM team that supports the initiative here, because they do it because we just want to support the community. The link to the recording will be circulated as well through the regular sources. That would be the liaison committee that will get that link. So they will be able to distribute it out to people. And we will also send out the link to those of you that registered. So if you have any others in your organization that you think might benefit from Andrew's presentation to get today, then you'll be getting that link to the presentation. And you will soon be getting announcements of the May and June IMCanadaConnect installments through either your chapter notices or from our our Western IM Learn With Us registration list. So I want everybody to have a really great rest of your week. And thanks again for being on our presentation today. And again, thanks, Andrew.
Okay, I'll again like to thank everyone who came in on the call.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.